We have estimated about 2 million hectares of avoided deforestation. Without this intervention, potentially 2 million hectares of forests would have been cleared. That's about the size of Slovenia, or I think 12 times London.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Resilient Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Priscillia. Priscillia, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much for having me here, Tom, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So my name is Priscillia. I'm the Director of Strategy for MosaiX, a company incorporated in the Netherlands, but I'm also Senior Advisor to Innovatie Digital and Earthqualizer Foundation, which are the different branches, and together we work as a sustainable advising organization for the corporate sector. I'm French and Canadian. I was born and raised in France, and I've always had a passion for environmental protection. I grew up in the rural part of France, so really in the mountain areas, and so really lived very close to nature. And when I grew up, I was also fascinated by foreign cultures and languages. Throughout my studies, I started to learn more about tropical forests and actually protecting forests worldwide. And quickly after my first internship, I moved to Malaysia and spent quite some time in Indonesia, helping companies save the rainforest.
Fantastic. And MosaiX that you mentioned there and helping corporate clients, what kind of corporate clients are you helping with what?
Okay, all right. So just a bit of a background for those who might not be familiar with the work that we're doing. Most of you will be familiar with palm oil, which is famous for the wrong reasons. So the palm oil product is used in a wide range of products. Palm oil is in your shampoo, cosmetics, in your biscuits, in animal feeds, in even used for biofuels, for cars. And so in the years 2000, late 2000s, you had a really massive NGO campaign accusing famous European brands of being responsible for destroying rainforests and killing orangutan habitats. And I don't know if some of you remember, back in the days, you had a very famous advertisement for a chocolate bar, and it was, basically, if you have this chocolate bar, you would have like two fingers, like you would see the person biting and biting in orangutan fingers. And at that time was kind of a shock. And a lot of brands in Europe were wondering, how can we be linked to that? We're just selling deodorants here in France, for example. And shortly they had to understand their supply chain impact and to work on traceability and how can they indeed be linked to habitat, endangered species habitat destructions. So in the early 2010s, and you had a movement of companies adopting what we call now as no deforestation commitments, meaning they would source all of their products that would be free of deforestation, peatland conversion, and also human right exploitation. And one of the very first breakthrough comprehensive policy was adopted in December 2013 by a major trader and refiner of palm oil that has its headquarters in Singapore, but is supplying the European and other markets. And so this is when I started my career. So I had this internship in Malaysia in 2014, and then I found my first job and was positioned to help that company in specific on, okay, you have a sustainability policy on paper. It's nice. It looks great and it has beautiful words, but how do you actually implement that? Because supply chains are so complex that to translate a policy into an operational level implementation, that's a bit more complicated. So this is where I started, and this is what our organizations have been focusing on since all these years. We've been helping companies with analyzing the risk in their supply chain, and also once you analyze the risk, what we help the companies with is not only, okay, let's say I'm a buyer, I'm buying palm oil, soy, other commodities, because I'm focusing about palm oil here, which has been the main focus of our work, as our headquarters are in Indonesia. Obviously, that was a big part of the challenge there. But this approach can apply to cocoa, coffee, and soy. And so once we identify a risk, once a company identify a risk in their supply chain, next is, okay, what to do with that? You have suppliers, some of them, you have long contract with them, for example, and ideally you don't want them out of your supply chain because you have commercial aspects to it. You might need their products. And so you engage with suppliers. And so this is what we do and we support with identify the risk, engage with the suppliers, facilitate this connection, and advise on long-term solutions. So for example, the deforestation must stop. That's the commitment, that's the policy. But then what's next? How do you actually gonna protect the forest? Because of course you have a legal aspects and different countries have different rules around that. And also what we should not forget is oftentimes local communities and smallholders were welcoming this development because they were promised jobs and like economic development. And so you also need to say, okay, like we're not going to clear forest anymore, but then what are we going to offer? How are we going to still improve the livelihood? And what's pretty amazing with the work that we do is that about 80% of our team is based and originally from Southeast Asia. So for them, having this kind of a real life impact matters. So you hear a lot, oh, we have like, I think in the Western world, you hear a lot, oh, you have to protect forest and you have to, but it seems kind of like just like nice words. And I love what we do because then our team say, yeah, well, actually that really matters for us there on the ground. And we want to see improved life conditions, including like, yeah, avoiding environmental destruction. Yeah.
And how are you helping companies with those commitments?
So concretely, the way we do that is, so I'm gonna talk if, let's say you are a company and you say, I would like to make sure that my supply chain is not destroying forests. There's no human right exploitation in there. Step number one is usually to look into traceability. So the way we help companies is, okay, where are you actually buying from? Who are your suppliers and where are they operating? You will look at that about, okay, who are they? Pure corporate intelligence. Okay, where are they incorporated? In which commodities do they operate? What's the structure? Do they have a manufacturing business? Do they have plantation business? So all of that, we do kind of a profiling. And then we look at actual physical supply chain. So then we would say, oh, a specific company, a downstream company, let's say a Dutch company, would be buying from several meals, let's say the facility that process the fresh fruit bunches. I don't want to get too technical in there, but
Sure.
yeah, that's we call it a meal, those that process the oil palm fruits into palm oil. And so they would look at there, and then we have our team, we have an incredible team of experts that have all the data necessary to basically analyze the risk. So they look at the plantation location, so like having the accurate baseline, such as where are the plantation, what are the boundaries, who are they operated by, and how is that actually linked to the specific, to that specific downstream company in the Netherlands, if we follow this example. And so they look, those are the plantation, those are the boundaries. And then we use new technologies to detect land use change. This is where it gets interesting. I think the discussions around new technologies and would that ever replace human? I know that there's been a lot of trending discussions around that. It is very useful, and you can have algorithm to detect land use change. So you would be looking at, yeah, has a patch of forest been removed or things like this. But this will never replace the human eyes, So the way we do it is we use this algorithm detection, this platform, so this tech platform with like automated alerts, but we always add a human expert eye, meaning that our team always go through the findings and actually look at oh, is it actually, they use different satellite imagery, different resolutions, and they say, well, is that actually a forest loss? Or could it be sometimes replanting, right? Because if you remove the old palm trees, it can also be detected as a loss of forest. But actually, if you look from a human eye, it wouldn't be. So they look at that, and I think the accuracy and it matters a lot, especially when you talk about a real life engagement and potentially reconsidering your relation with the supplier, right? So tech helps, but it cannot replace the human eyes. So we detect that. We have the sort of tech platform, our team that validates the finding. In some cases, even using satellite imagery, the finding cannot be verified. So in this case, we send teams on the ground. So we have a presence on the ground. We have several offices and islands of Sumatra and the island of Borneo on the Indonesian side. So our team can go verify themselves through field investigation. Or we also have a fleet of drones. So we also can fly drones over some areas that could be controversial. And so once you have these findings and it's confirmed that's the company that was clearing forest or burning areas or like clearing a peatland, then you report back to that company in the Netherlands and say, well, it's confirmed, it's that suppliers, they've cleared this amount of forest, you should engage them. And then next step is to advise them what to do. So in general, it includes they should adopt an immediate stop work order, meaning no more development until we assess the situation further. They should commit to themselves to no deforestation policies, and they should be involved in the long-term sustainability programs, including local government, local communities, and any local stakeholders. At the moment, we're working with about 25 companies at different level of the supply chain. Some are consumer goods companies, some are more midstream manufacturers, others are like refiners and traders, so those that buy the oil directly. But we also work with plantation companies underground. So as you can imagine, the level of support is different, like the need is different depending on where you are. But this approach has been very successful. And so we've been doing that for about 10 years now. And why it is successful? Because you're talking about the buyer to supplier relations or business to business. And so when we detect a deforestation case, sometimes it stops within a week, just by a phone call. You cannot, I'm sorry, you're violating the terms of my contract. That cannot continue. It stops. We've looked at all the cases where our partners and ourselves have intervened using exactly the same methodology of risk assessment and engagement. And we have estimated about 2 million hectares of avoided deforestation. Without this intervention, potentially 2 million hectares of forests would have been cleared. That's about the size of Slovenia, or I think 12 times London. So it's quite significant. And now next is what we're really trying to do. Ideally, you would have all companies involved in this type of work. Oftentimes, downstream companies, the consumer goods companies, like, no, I'm too far down the supply chain and I have no impact. Well, actually, no, there is, they can really contribute. And ideally, you would have a shared responsibility effort throughout the supply chain with the suppliers. Sometimes it's not direct suppliers, but you buy through layers of suppliers until you actually reach to a plantation on the ground. But ideally, you would have this support to engage and to do this kind of work. So now next is, okay, you have this 2 million hectares of avoided deforestation. There's actually more, but this is what we have quantified based on our work.
Sure.
And then it's like, okay, what's next? Then these forests needs to be legally protected. So that's, of course, that's another challenge, because you have also to consider the political interests, which is, and in any country, not the same, right? It sometimes can be conflicting.
Sure. And what's driving the urgency around deforestation-free supply chains right now?
I think a lot of forests have long been carbon sinks. I mean, not have long, but they are a carbon sinks. And so more and more, when you look at the discussions around reducing greenhouse gases emission or like storing more carbon stocks, oftentimes forest protection is one of the solution, if I can say so. So if you look at the forest itself and for like the pure carbon value, then that's really necessary when looking at climate change, at broader climate change discussions. So that would be the macro level. If you look at the micro level, of course, forests have a very vital functions. of course, providing clean air to breathe, also like a clean water and preventing erosion. So in a lot of the areas that are actually being deforested, you have issues with floodings. So for example, also you have like, if you clear mangrove areas, I know that there are some areas in west of Borneo that you have now flooding and the sea getting in, eroding villages because of the mangrove that have been cleared. And so of course there's no natural barrier anymore. And of course, I would say for the sake of course, the biodiversity, I guess we want the next generation to be able to travel to these places and to see orangutan and to potentially see tigers. And I think this is why a lot of countries now are having regulations around no deforestation commitment. So if we look at the European Union, for example, they adopted the EU deforestation regulation, whereby there should be no imports of deforestation for 7 commodities, which is palm oil, cocoa, soy, timber, rubber. I might have forgotten one, but like the main commodities that are driving deforestation worldwide. And so any product that would be placed on the EU markets will have to follow strict due diligence declaration and processes. So any companies that would be importing a set of defined products, I mean those commodities and defined derivatives, will have to prove they do not come from deforestation. That is actually a great thing, because the deforestation commitment I was mentioning earlier that were adopted in the year 2010, those were voluntary commitments. So you had a good number of companies, in fact, a lot of companies with headquarters in Southeast Asia have adopted it, and they're really doing great, and the progress is really amazing. But still you had a lot of companies, because it's voluntary and they could get away with it, then they would, why should we bother implementing it? So you had a lot of European company had the commitments, but were not necessarily implementing it actively and rather relying on suppliers to do the job. So the great thing with EUDR, in short, the EU deforestation regulation, is that it creates a level playing field whereby all companies now within the EU have to follow the same level of standards. So it's really created a good baseline for everybody, pushing them working on traceability. So I think that there was a bit of a panic of like a lot of companies actually not even knowing where they were buying from, other than, oh, I'm buying soy from Brazil, for example, or some of the best cases at state level. But it's like, no, this EUDR actually requires companies to trace back to the facility where they bought from and beyond, which means the land plots, the land of production of that specific commodities. And not only they have to trace back to the plot of production, but they have to submit the plot of production when they will import the product into the EU. So together with the due diligence, it would have, okay, those are the maps, those are the plots we're buying this specific commodity from. And this is the proof that they are produced legally, because of course the legal aspect is important. So legally meaning in line with local regulations. So from wherever country was imported from, and that it's free of deforestation. So they would have to show a set of documents. Let's say this plot has this land title, and then they would have to attach satellite imagery, for example, to show that this was not deforested. And it actually goes beyond proving that the commodity was produced legally and free of deforestation. If your product came from an area, a district, or a state that is high risk. So let's say your plot of production is low risk, okay? Like there's no deforestation, it's all legal, but perhaps it is located in an area that is extremely high risk because of many illegal smallholders or farmers operating there, or perhaps there's still a high forest cover, like a deforestation has been like really high in the past couple of years. Then you would have to show you have risk mitigation processes in place to avoid buying from a high risk area in the future. That's actually pretty good. This is back to your question on why, like, the urgency of protecting forests. So like the governments are realizing that, and you have similar commitments, or I would say maybe The EU one is really the highest standard one at the moment. But I know that in the US, there were discussions about the US Forest Act. That would be more, though, about importing products coming from illegal deforestation. So that does not necessarily address all the issues. And it's important to know here that most of the deforestation happening in the world, it is actually legal as per local regulation. So certain countries they allow. So that, for example, in Indonesia, if you look at palm oil plantation, once you get the business permits and you have the right to operate, if it's forest, not forest, you have the right to operate. You lease the land for a certain number of years and you can just clear it all. And in fact, we see what's pretty interesting if you look at how companies are committed to sustainability versus how some countries want like the pure development, like a short-term gain. Some companies they say no, sorry, like we cleared a certain amount of land and it's enough for us, like enough production for operating viably.
Mhm.
But then they say, okay, we have a certain amount of forest we do not want to clear anymore. We want to set it aside because yeah, there's a survey saying like there's orangutan or anything. But then the government comes at them and say, no, 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 I lease the land so that you can clear it. So please, you have to clear it. And so we've had these cases, some cases where actually the land was taken back from the government and leased to another company that would be willing to clear it. So that's, yeah.
Ouch. And
Yeah.
EUDR, the EU deforestry regulation, what's the hardest part of that for companies trying to comply, and for companies that are non-compliant, what are the penalties?
I would say maybe because we've been doing the work for quite a while, if it's about finding the right partners. So, for example, finding an organization like ours who can actually help, I would say they could be compliant and have all in place like very quickly. Because we've been doing this work for like about 10 years and we've been like really focusing on a solution for the EUDR since early days, I think since early 2023 when it was not even officially enacted yet. A lot of companies have been proactively looking at the potential risk against the EU-DR, so that's actually pretty good. So, and of course, we're not the only one out there. I think we're doing things pretty good, but I'm sure that there are plenty of others that can help. So it's about finding the right partner. Of course, if companies would do it by themselves, that can be really overwhelming because it seems such a huge task to undertake. So that's it. And sorry, I would like to add that this apply for certain commodities, palm oil and soy. Others, they might not be ready. I would say there are commodities like timber, rubber that might have more difficult times. But those that we've been dealing with, they've been doing that for a very long time. So I don't see a major concern. I think some companies are still betting on the EUDR being canceled or delayed again. So I feel I feel like those that by now that I've not worked on any of this work is because they are still hoping there might be a change. So let's say it goes as planned. A product placed on the market must be free of deforestation and legal and so forth. And it turns out that a product that's imported is not legal, then there will be fines. I forgot exactly the fines, the percentage. I think it can go up to 9% of the total revenue within the European Union. So that depends on that's also something, to be honest, the EU has still not clarified certain things. And I guess we were talking about how a policy is good looking and nice on paper, but the implementation can be more challenging. I think this is what we're seeing with this EUDR. So there are a lot of unanswered questions on how some technical thing would actually be like, we would need more guidance from the EU, which we haven't got. But it's fine. I think companies and ourselves, we've taken that proactively and tried to define certain things by ourselves. So why I'm mentioning this, because the penalty that would apply is depending on if you import it from a negligible risk and high risk and a medium risk. And what's kind of interesting, this all has been very politic. So at the moment, everybody, like anyone at the beginning had been put as standard risk. And now one of the latest revision, they had put, I think it was Belarus and another country that we put in as a high risk. And I think even Russia actually, but all the others, they were like standards. Like this has actually nothing to do with the actual forest, the deforestation risk. Anyway, my point is that now we're still waiting this to be defined, and there's a lot of political and lobbying games where countries like Malaysia, they're always like in Brussels and trying to influence the outcome of not being high risk and not being low risk. Oh yeah, it's been pretty funny to watch.
Sure. And can you share any success stories from the customers that you work with?
Success story. Well, I think we have many success stories, but let's say I'm wondering which one in specific that I could highlight. Okay, I will talk about one of our main partners, Unilever. I can mention the name. There's nothing confidential about it. It's all in their sustainability reports and about
Great.
the work that we do. So we've been working with Unilever since the end of 2018. And Unilever was one of the companies that was targeted in this big campaign of the late 2000s and early 2010s. And they had tried for many years to work on this, on implementing their sustainability commitment, but it was very hard because the supply chain is really, really complex.
Mm.
They buy from many suppliers, many countries, and because of the nature of the business, of the type of products that they need, a lot of them are specialty fats and derivatives that they need sometimes in small amount from a specific trader that might be in like so it's hard. And in 2018, 2019, the first step was really to understand, so kind of make sense of this whole traceability work. So trying to understand their supply chain structure and the supply chain risk. So the very first stage of the partnership was about setting up the scenes. You're basically, okay, where they buy from, what's the potential risk, and like doing this risk analysis and monitoring of the supply chain. So this is also something we do for all of our partners. We have a bi-weekly monitoring of the supply chain, of ongoing deforestation and other things. And this is how the partnership started, and it evolved in being really a close partnership. So the scope of the work has been expanded. So from it followed the logic of, okay, traceability, risk analysis, and looking at long-term solutions. And so since 2018 until now, this is the flows that this partnership has followed. And Unilever has put a lot of effort in. So just a step back. Many suppliers were suspended out of a sustainable supply chain in 2018, 2019, 2020, because there was a big push from NGOs. Okay, they're non-compliant, they must be out. They're non-compliant, they must be out. And for us, we say, okay, that could be indeed a step if the supplier is not willing to cooperate. If after engaging several times they don't want to cooperate. So yeah, you need to respect your policy as well. But what we've always encouraged is suspend, then engage. Because if you just suspend and then look away, it's like a hit and run, right? Eventually, those suppliers, you have to see human aspects behind this, like, right? You have people that are working there that might lose their job if they have to stop producing. So Unilever, they got that right. And so a lot of the companies that they had suspended because of the external pressure and so forth, now they're looking at, okay, which ones can we actually re-engage? One, indeed, to look into really work on inclusion of the company themselves, but also of the smallholders. What we should see is that there's also a lot of smallholders and small farmers that are selling to these companies. So how can we reintegrate them? And of course, buyers, they always want more supply instead and less, right? You want to have the choice. You don't want to limit yourself. They've undertaken this amazing work of what we call a re-entry and recovery. So the re-entry is, okay, that the company can be back in the supply chain if they have, a sustainability policy, and if they commit to a certain, there's a list to follow and they must commit to this. One of the thing is what we call a recovery. So recovery is, okay, that company, they might have been driving deforestation in the past, but there's actually a way for them to redeem themselves. And this would be for them to protect forests and to restore forests. So there's this work that is being done now and is becoming mainstream in the palm oil industry, which is Okay, how can we collectively, as buyers and suppliers, protect certain areas of forest or restore certain areas of forest that have been cleared? And this should be done locally, meaning that you're gonna protect the forest or restore a forest where you had cleared, not just, sometimes you have this carbon offsets where you
Hmm.
polluted in Guatemala, but you can just pay for a forest in Indonesia. So no, this is not the concept. The concept is really a local benefit for the environment and local community. So you give back where you took from, basically. And so they've supported that, and a lot of suppliers are very enthusiastic about that because for them it's also a pride of, okay, we're doing things great for our communities, for our workers, for stakeholders on the ground. We're making a better livelihood. So we've seen even motivation of these suppliers because I think we're getting away from an approach of, oh, you're bad, you must be out, you deforest, to more like, yeah, no, like actually you can do great and you can really do great achievement for your environment. And so they kind of this positive mindset also because a lot are realizing that if you do good and if you adopt sustainable practices, your business will benefit. Like the commercial aspects is very important in this being sustainable decisions. So if you develop the land properly, you can avoid floodings, and you can avoid erosion, and you can avoid fires. And if you treat your workers right and like do not steal the land of local communities, then you would avoid strikes and having some people blocking your roads, like, and your trucks getting out of your plantation. So I think a lot of realizing now that it's actually more beneficial for the business in the longer term. And so instead of having a quick benefit and like quick gain. So I'm going a bit away from the main question, but it's back to why Unilever and other companies are doing that. And another one is there's a lot of effort that Unilever has put into smallholders inclusion. So really mapping the small farmers, like trying to understand where they are, where do they operate, and if there's any issue with them operating informally or illegally, then how can we actually support them to go through the legal road? Because, and this is going to be very crucial for the EUDR as well. A lot of them are saying, well, but the smallholders, the small farmers, they will never comply. But no, actually, it's they can comply if you support them. Sometimes it's just a matter of helping them going through the bureaucratic steps of registering the land and getting a letter to prove that the land is legal, right? Because sometimes it's a land that had been passed on from generation to generation. And
Sure.
so yeah, there's also a lot of effort that is now being put in smallholder inclusion. So yeah, Unilever is really a success story, and they are really doing great. They have by now a really well established and brilliant sustainability team. They got the support from like the higher up, like higher management, so which is pretty good. And this is one of many. We work with several big names like Procter and Gamble, Barry Callebaut, Mars, and so those they all have similar stories.
Yeah, of course, of course. For people who are listening to this, supply chain leaders today who are listening to this, who may be overwhelmed by EUDR, what message would you give them?
I think if you take the time to work with the right experts, so that could be internally. Some people are really having dedicated team, or with external partners, providers. If you're willing to put the resource into that, and when I talk about resource, it doesn't mean putting like hundreds of thousands of millions. Like usually the solution is it's not that expensive, like whether you hire someone internally or someone externally. But I think it starts with the willingness and the support from the top management to actually look into that. So it's really about step number one, which is crucial, and then everything will kind of come more easily, is the traceability. Who are your suppliers,
Mm.
your direct suppliers? Who are their suppliers? And so usually would engage them and try to understand where their supply chain impact is. So it's about creating a relation really with your suppliers and understand how they operate, where they operate. And EUDR can seem intimidating. To be honest, I don't think it's really, really hard. And maybe because I work on this every day, so it doesn't seem hard. But yet my point is like plenty of people out there that can definitely help with that. But it's about doing it now, and it's about being proactive. And it's like, even if it's delayed, it better be proactive, because so some of our partners, of our corporate partners, what they've done is that they worked proactively on implementing EUDR. And what we see is that even if it's delayed or even if it's canceled, it actually created systems for them. It created, like, they collected a lot of data and kind of established procedures that they will keep on following. That is actually useful. And there was a study, and because in terms of resources, a lot are saying, oh, we're going to have to spend so much into that. They were saying that actually the cost of EUDR is, I think, is 0.02% something of the revenue of a company. So it's really insignificant. And yeah, you better have that than having, I don't know, 9% of your revenue being as a fine. So
Fair. Yeah, good point. Good point. A left field question for you, Pris. If you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a champion for deforestation-free supply chains, who would it be and why?
oh, that's a good that's a good question that I had never thought about. I don't know if I have one name really, like no one specific, because I think there are several organization and leaders that have been influencing different things and yeah, no, I don't know, honestly, Tom, on this point.
No worries. No worries. No worries.
I mean, but two that have inspired me tremendously are two. So, well, one, his name is Eric Walker. He's our most senior team member. He will retire soon, but he has dedicated his entire life since he was in his 20s to saving forest. He started his career in Philippines and in Indonesia and Malaysia looking at illegal timber. And he did a PhD in geography, and that helped him, of course, look into the impact of illegal timber. And he's been working on advocating for protecting forests since the 90s. He's one of the very first one who looked into the actual impact of oil palm development in Indonesia. So yeah, he's dedicated his life to it, and he's been the lead of a lot of the breakthrough of this and no deforestation policy. He was behind advocating, talking to companies on having that adopted. And so yeah, that him and his Indonesian counterpart, so who is currently our CEO, he himself has had his land affected directly by oil palm development, and so he's been personally involved into investigating the cases of palm oil development and writing reports of 100 of pages against certain companies back in the days where back in the days they were more into like really the advocating campaigning side, and in this year 2010s. So yeah, they've been the one leading the way of the work that we're doing now and teaching us everything.
Okay, great. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Pris. Is there any question that I did not ask that you wish I did, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you feel is important?
Yeah, I think I would really like to highlight is that oftentimes in the West, I've seen a lot of discussions about forest protection being all about reducing GHG emission and like carbon. And really, it is indeed an aspect, but forest has a value for local communities. It has a value for where it belongs. And oftentimes we do not see the reality of things, right? It might seem something abstract when you're just like, yeah, on a couch somewhere in Europe. And I've seen firsthand, I've spent time in the Malaysian part of Borneo in Sarawak, and I've seen firsthand the forest destruction and how there was this community. They woke up one morning, they went to church, they were at the mass, and they came back in the afternoon to their land, to their agroforests, and it had been cleared by a company. Like, can you
Wow.
believe you yourself, you come back home, you had like planted this beautiful fruit tree that you were leaving from because of course that was agroforest, our source of income. And they woke up and they say, oh, I've been there to the site, and it was 30 hectares, which might seem 30 hectares at the scale of deforestation is nothing. I mean, we've seen cases. We know of one company that's cleared 21,000 hectares in the past 5 to 7 years. So I've seen it and it looked apocalyptic.
Hmm.
It really looks, and I was, oh, that's just 30 hectares. So can you believe areas of thousands and thousands of hectares? So that's my point is that, and I would like also if there are people watching here that are buying from any forest areas and I think that there might be an impact on really take the time to understand the impact and to try to create a change because yeah, in the end it matters.
Cool. Okay. Pris, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
They can reach out directly to my LinkedIn account, Priscillia Moulin, and they can also check out our website, MosaiX.earth, and they would find more information about what we're doing.
Okay. I'll put links to those in the show notes so everyone has access to them. Great. Super.
Okay, great.
Pris, that's been really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
And thanks to you for having me here.